Baxter Brown tightened his grip on the icy doorknob of the apartment 1620 and kicked the frost from his boots onto the welcome mat. That was about the last thing Baxter felt. Welcome, that is, for the first time in his own complex. It was cool, 36 degrees in Washington country that day. Of all the things I might have expected to hear bitching about, like a cold shower or the stair rail stinging, like he could do anything about it. The smell of something burning would have been his last guess. Then again, it was Thanksgiving, after all. And Lord knew if it wasn't for Monica's way around the new fancy pants conventional oven that he had installed in the very last unit of the place, the White Bear luxury apartments might have turned up in flames years ago. Burnt the bird, Miss Chumpton? Baxter was reapproaching the same soft smile of the old woman, but something told him it was neither of them that were truly happy to be there. If truth be told, he would have rather been downstairs with Monica or his son stuffing breadcrumbs into the brim of the gobber ass. But it was one of those landlord duties. He was nicely accustomed to his autumnal years. Beside the Comptons was the old friends. Bird? Mrs. Chumpton asked, nudging him forward into the apartment, which was just as crammed as she was. Baxter's smile widened as he plopped himself onto the cushioned recliner that he sat silently in the corner. Rick's chair. It had been there ever since they moved. Some 12 years prior, after all those Algonquin folks moved out on that day, it was just as gloom and nippy as this one, where the wind outside was gusted with high-pitched whistles, and the pine trees scratched along the window glass. Turkey, Baxter finally said. Speaking of which, he nestled into the cushion. Where's that old man of yours? Baxter grinned from ear to ear as his eyes strayed from the old woman and across from the room. Judging by the lack of warmness on his ass, Rick hadn't been asleep on his perching spot all day, and now that the crisp of November was left at the door, Baxter could get a whiff of something burnt to a crisp inside. It was strong, sharp stench that made him clack his tongue and sat up a bit straighter. Old man, where there's a tremble in the olden voice. Baxter bit his lips. Teresa might have been losing it. He only hoped it wasn't her dearly beloved, wherever the hell he was. Rick, Baxter said, listening as the clatter went on in the kitchen. He stared forward at the boob tube play on the parade on mute and waited for the old woman's response, which took an agonizing minute of silence to get to. The clatter in the kitchen had stopped without him realizing it, and the rest of the apartment was dead silent. "Oh, Rick," she said in realization. The clatter continued. "Yeah?" Baxter replied, attempting to look over his shoulder, but only meeting his cheek with the soft brush of the headrest. "Where is he?" The smell was nearly unbearable now. Baxter was about to sit up when he felt something crunch against his thigh. He shoved his fingers, finally warmed up, into the cushion and fiddled around until something brushed against his thumb. It was kind of wrapper, twisted around in a broken butterscotch. A Rick Champton favorite, especially during Thursday night poker, where there were only other thing he'd be stucking on the pot dry. Obviously the boys would be taking the night off for the holiday, but come early in December. The best perk of living in a reservation that would mark their calendars yet again, and Baxter would find himself $1 closer to paying off the White Bear's mortgage. He smiled, a genie smiled this time, and shoved the candy into his pocket, checking the other side of his ass for more. His fingers eventually met with something he had, and momentarily touched, assumed it to be another of the candies, but it wasn't. It was the television remote, and it was suspiciously wet. "He'll be done soon," Teresa finally said, answering the question that Baxter had forgotten he'd ask. As he raised the clicker, the slickness of the visibility red substance spread across his thumb, and his chest rose with breath. "Done with what?" Teresa didn't answer. Instead, his question was met with silence from the kitchen. Baxter aimed at the tiny remote at the television and, with a press of his finger, the rockets blipped into blackness, and suddenly he could see himself in his scruffy double chin, his belt buckle, and that led up to his corduroys. and his boots that still dripped with melting snow, he lifted his eyes just beyond the reflection of his head until they rocked with the gaze of the flabby old woman, just standing still all by her lonesome, in the kitchen staring off blankly, as if she had no idea where or who she was. Done with. She started back up, repeating with what he had said done with, and then, just as if jolting from a dream, spasmed with her neck. I don't know, she said with those final words, with a higher inflection, as if tickled by them in her throat. The woman's head then began to turn in the direction, and with the impulsive tug of the wooden handle on his right side, Baxter dropped as the recliner reclined, popping into its second position. Ricky? That same higher-pitched tone said from the kitchen. Baxter silently stared at it for a moment. At the ceiling, the dust had accumulated along the crown molding, and the black dirt ring where the smoke detector ought to be seen. It's Baxter Teresa. Baxter? He could hear his shoes shuffle across the tile floor until they were reached with the carpeted hallway. In here, he said, pushing the wooden handle forward. Somehow her new tone sounded welcoming now. With a blink, the old woman stood before him, before dropping onto the couch just across the room. She let out a cough and with a sniff of the air, puckered her lips. Where's Rick? And what's that awful smell? Baxter gulped a hot swallow of his spit down his gullet and rocked forward in the chair. That's whatever Ben's asking you. The woman rapidly blinked and sniffed the air again. How long have you been here? About 5 minutes, maybe 10. The woman's eyes widely darted around the room. And did you... My turn to ask the questions, Baxter said, cutting her off and remembering the wetness on his thumb. Teresa reluctantly agreed with the frazzled nod, and Baxter licked his chops and his chair squeaked like a chipmunk. Why did you remove the smoke detector? The old woman's eyes bounced on the ceiling and back down. I didn't. Baxter nodded, unsure of whether or not he believed in her. What's in the oven? I don't know. Baxter sighed and scratched his two chins. The chair rocked until it couldn't any more, and then he leaned onto her, smelling the same stench of the kitchen all over her hunched body, stained with everything, plus the kitchen sink. If there's something going on, he said with a deep whisper, you've got to tell me, Teresa. The woman shook her head, until tears began streaming down her reddened cheeks, and as she could see now was a stain on Baxter's fingers. I don't know, she trembled, both with her voice and hands. I thought it was a dream. What was? What happened? What happened? The woman glanced around her room and realized that it was only them in apartment 1620. Ricky was acting funny. Funny? How? Well, it wasn't funny. It was awful. What was? The chair squeaked again, and Teresa flinched. That smell was beginning to get to the both of them. Rick was looking sick. He was colorless, and his eyes were sunken. When was this? Last night. I had to make some last-minute stuffing, and was going to wait until today to give it to him, but... You gave it to him anyway? Right, the woman said. Her hands were now clasped together as if in prayer, and her face was twisted into a question. Why are you here? Got some complaints. Thought you might have need help in the kitchen. But I guess I was right, Baxter said, but he didn't smile. What happened after you give Rick the stuffing? She winced and sneezed in her own hand until it was red. His mouth dropped open. While eating? Teresa nodded. I thought he had choked, but he hadn't. There weren't words coming out, but the stuffing never flung. His tongue didn't move. Neither did his eyes. Baxter leaned back in his chair. Where was this? The woman lifted a pointed finger, which seemed to wilt even more than it did extend. You're sitting in it. A chill ran down Baxter's spine and forced his ass up a bit. His stomach churned like butter, and the smell about the room was now edible, tangible. What was he saying? The old woman shook her head as her earrings rattled. It wasn't him talking. It was some other voice, another language, perhaps several. Like Spanish? Those earrings rattled again. I've heard Spanish before. Her voice began to crack, and then her tears began to flow. She rose to her feet and Baxter followed her up. Oh, Baxter, please, you gotta help us. Let me check the bedroom, he said, as calmly as he could. "We'll figure this out." Teresa grasped his arm and nodded silently, watching as he passed her and approached the dark bedroom across the apartment. From even a good 10 feet away, he could hear the buzzing of flies emanating from the doorway. There was another feeling in his gut that told him that he ought to have thought he turned around and left 1620. But this sheer curiosity compelled him forward into the flame. He felt the long, smooth drywall until his index finger flicked the light switch, hidden in the blackness. The bedroom was instantly flooded with warm white foam, and the lamp was in the corner, and harsh shadows stretched across the room. Resting on the bed before him, atop the covers and swarmed with dozens of buzzing flies, was raw, slow, rotting turkey. "Shit!" Baxter nearly belched a bile into his sleeve that found its way across his nose and mouth, his other arm slamming against the door into his bedroom with a loud thud. Some of the hanging photos along the wall rattled, and he turned to Teresa to apologize for his language, only to be met with the empty living room and a reclining chair. The sight shot the hairs off the back of his neck straight up, like toy soldiers at attention. Immediately he surveyed the apartment, back and forth. It was empty and quiet, aside from the familiar sound, clatter in the kitchen. As Baxter turned the corner from the carpet to tile, the clinking and clanking of the metal and wood reverberated off the walls that seemed to ever so slowly close in. The stench of the oven was overwhelming now, and just about to breathe, Baxter had covered his red nose. "Teresa?" he called out. That all clanging abruptly stopped with his voice. He took another step into the kitchen and watched the still-standing woman face the oven door, foul odor smoke rising from its depths. "In here," her voice rang. The words were choppy and deeper like before, and nearly sounded as if they were spoken by dozens of mouths at a time, as if none of them had any idea as to what they were actually saying. Baxter stopped cold in his tracks, halfway across the room beside the fridge. Teresa, or whatever the hell she was now, was faced away from him. "This was not how I wanted to spend my holiday," Baxter grumbled to himself, panting to his feet firmly on the tile floor. "There's nothing holy about it." "The voice is from somewhere," Mrs. Kempton said. Baxter puffed his chest. "I don't know who or what you think you are," he said, deepening his voice and knowing that he wasn't talking to Rick's wife anymore. "But you're going to get the hell out of my land." The old woman's head by degrees twisted to face him, and the voices emitted from her stangent lips, wet with saliva, were unrecognizable and barely coherent. "This was never your land, white man. You claimed it. We claimed you." The oven timer dinged, and Baxter nearly tumbled to the ground as he rushed for the front door, hearing the colony of voices within Teresa Kempton's body howl over his shoulder. There were 3 distant thuds that rapidly rushed through the tile behind him, but just as the tile turned to carpet, Baxter slammed the door to the apartment 1620, and nearly leapt over the frozen guardrail that stretched across the way. A blend of ice and fallen autumn leaves snapped between the concrete and his boots, as Baxter descended the stairs and raced down towards his apartment, ready to grab Monica and her son to get as far away from the white bear as possible. He plunged the key into the freezing metal knob and twisted, gripping it as hard as it could grip back. When the clock clicked, Baxter thrust his way through the door and felt the warmth of Thanksgiving feast wrap him like a smoky blanket. The door slammed behind him and a howl, maybe of wind, pierced through the foggy windows, but Baxter didn't hear it. He was too distracted by the smell, and dribble had found its way down his chin-ins. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it. as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.